everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. This week I am going to be continuing on with my Titanic rose coat project. This is what is sometimes called the swim coat, but it's Rose's pink coat that she wears very briefly as the Titanic starts to sink until she has to abandon it. And last week I got the whole main body of the coat done. There's still a lot that has to happen to it, like putting all of the seam treatments on, for example, or sleeves. That's a little something. And obviously the collar and all the embroidery. And in fact, the embroidery is going to be one of the things that I'm hoping to focus on this week. Now, I have found some place where I could go and I could purchase the embroidery pattern, basically get it custom made for me for $50. A, it's a little bit more than I'd want to spend, and B, it dawned on me that if I'm actually able to digitize the embroidery, then that means that I could put it for sale in my Etsy shop and make it available to any of you who are interested in it. Because currently there is not an adult size or human size embroidery pattern for this coat for sale, which kind of blows my mind. I would think that that would have been something that would have occurred over the last, 20 some odd years since the movie came out. But yeah, there's not. So I want to make that a possibility for you. However, my embroidery software is over 10 years old at this point, and I don't even know if I'm going to be able to access it on my computer because it works off of a disk, which means I have to use an older computer that has a disk drive. So that's going to be something I'm going to be attempting in this video. But before I can even get there, we have to pattern the collar. And before I can do the cuff embroidery, we have to pattern the cuffs. So the very first thing that we are going to be doing in this video is patterning the collar. Now, as my base, I am going to be using McCall's 8123. That's an Angela Clayton pattern, because I think this collar is actually pretty darn similar. The biggest difference is that this collar has a seam up the back. We can't do that. So I need to make this collar seamless. But other than that, I think the shape is going to be right. So I'm going to go ahead and just mock up what is here, mock it up to my size and see what that does. So let's go ahead and cut that out. So slight change of plans. It turns out that this collar is cut fully in one with the jacket bodice pieces, and there are no collar pieces. So instead I'm switching over to Butterick 5232, and we are going to try playing with these collars. This one is like a sailor collar in the back, but this is rounded in the back, whereas it's not round in the front. So I'm going to combine the two, and we're going to test that out instead. So I actually already had a mock-up that was saved in the pattern envelope from whenever it was that I used this last. I'm honestly not sure. And it's close, but not quite. For one thing, I think you can see here, I'll pop a picture of the actual one right here, but this is just a little bit too shallow of a curve. So it needs to be a little steeper up here until we get to about here at the shoulder, where honestly, I think we're just about spot on going over the shoulder this way, because we should be just about to where the sleeve seam is. And we are. Once you take the seam allowance away, I think we would be about a 1/4 inch. Oh, though it actually just dawned on me, this also would have seam allowance. So really we need to increase this by the seam allowance. So that needs to be a 1/2 inch wider. It's the back where things get a little funky. Clearly the curve of the neckline on this collar is not at all what this is. So I think that the best way to figure out what it should be is actually to move this up so that it meets the collar in the center, and then just kind of pinch that out. And once it is pinched and pinned out, we can lay this flat and kind of press it. So it's it gets a really big dart in it all the way through, taking out that angle there. And that should fix the angle of the collar. Then obviously it does need to be doubled, because this one was just half a collar. So it would need to be doubled, and it would need to have the seam allowance on, but also the shape back here is too shallow. Her collar is actually a little bit longer. I would say probably down to about here if I had to eyeball it. So it would need to be extended to here plus seam allowance, and it would need to taper in so that it's nice and wide until we get to about here, when it would come back to be that just add seam allowance measurement there. So yeah, and I also have to figure out, right now on my dress form, we're getting this kind of bubble right here, and obviously I don't want the collar to mimic that as well. So I want to make sure that that goes away. But yeah, we're pretty close. We just need to kind of fix that curve there and extend this back piece. So I'm going to make another one of these that will better fit this coat. Okay, I'm torn. I have mock-up number 2 on here right now, and I tapered it in the front like I mentioned I was going to, based on this picture right here, which is the only picture where it shows it open fully and like flat. But then I went and looked at this picture right here with it closed, and you can see that it looks way more rounded. Like I should have actually had it come out probably here. So now I'm really torn on which one of these is correct. Obviously right now I do have this kind of brought to the center as if it were closed. And so I'm thinking maybe the rounded look would have been correct. So what I think I might do is I'm going to cut one more of these. Remember also that this does not have seam allowance added. So this is like where the stitch line would be, where the edge would be. But I think I'm going to cut one more of these with the greater curve, the rounder curve out there. The rest of this, by the way, it does look really good. So I increased the shoulder width. I increased the length back here. I think that this is the right shape here in the back. It is just the front that now I'm not so sure of. Yeah, I think it's got to be, rounder to get that right look. So I'm gonna make one more of these and kind of drape it on top of this side and see which one I like better. Okay, yeah, I'm glad I gave it another go. This one is definitely more correct than this one. This is just way too cut in. So we're gonna scrap that one. I didn't show you how I did that, by the way. It was kind of amusing, but you can see all of my little numbers around the outside of like how much I was extending it. And that's because while I had it on here, I actually went around with pins and basically mapped out where I wanted it to be and then measured those places and extended it that much onto this one. So I am now going to cut this out. I'm going to obviously add in the seam allowance for this, and I'm trying to figure out just how many layers this needs to be cut out of, because for machine embroidery, I'm going to need to have some sort of stabilizer in there in the hoop. And the stabilizer that I normally use for embroidery gets torn away, so it doesn't stay in there. However, we need something probably to keep this more structured anyway, though the embroidery itself may actually do that. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just cut it out of 2 layers of the wool, and then we're gonna go and try out embroidery. I still don't know if this is gonna work or not, but we're going to go and try that out. And once the embroidery is all done, then I'll see if we also need interfacing in there, because I can always add that afterwards once we're like sandwiching everything in. But yep, this is our pattern shape. So a very large rounded collar, and again this is going to be cut on the fold with seam allowance added on this side, but not on this side because this is already there. And yeah, let's go cut that out, and then we can figure out what our digitizing size needs to be. Oh no, guess what's back? For those of you who remember my video from last time, 3 of the pieces had a big gray line down them. Well, this was on the other side of the fold when I cut the collar, so this one has that gray piece too. I've only cut one of these so far. Maybe we can just make this the bottom one, but I don't have a ton of this fabric, so like I do have to use up kind of every little bit. I have this pile down here on the floor. Obviously we still have to do sleeves and cuffs as well, plus one more of these collars, and I have to do all of the strips because all of these seams are going to have strips going down them. So that is the front seams, the back seams, even the like front opening. It's going to have basically a strip that is going to be used as binding. I would love to not have seams within those. Like totally fine to have a shoulder one because those are hidden by the collar, although of course that is going to make it even more bulky, but I'm fine with a seam that is hidden by the collar basically, but nowhere else on here do I want to see a seam. And I'm pretty sure there are also the seams on this seam as well. So yeah, I have to have those strips everywhere. They're about like yay wide and they're folded in on the sides. We'll get to those hopefully in this video, depending on how digitizing goes, but I need to cut a lot of those. So I need all the fabric that I can get. Located the culprit. It actually was on top and I just didn't notice it, but the point pointed right to it. And it's this sort of fold that I think the fabric was folded like this when it was on its little bolt on the floor, and dust settled right there for, you know, the several months that it was on the floor, and that's why we have that little gray spot. So I don't know how far it goes down. Like I don't know if this goes the full length, but I'm definitely gonna have to look out for it. Like I don't see it. I do not see it there. I do see it there. Maybe it stops. That sure would be nice, because I mean, it came out in the wash, like it's not a big deal, but I don't want to have to go back and wash all of these, especially because this is a very particular cut and shape, and I'm going to have to like finish the edges because we learned from that mistake last week. So maybe this can be the bottom, but we'll have to be careful when we cut the others. So this is the first step that I'm taking in trying to get this embroidery done. And this is because I have been trying to work through like my super old software. It does not work on my current computer, and I'm not sure I remember how to do it on the old computer, but I need to know the scale first off of what size this design is going to be. So you know me, I did my scale math, and I actually took this section right here, looking at it like on a drawn collar versus on my collar, and then blew this up. For some reason, I swear that there was way more definition of this even before I printed it out, but once I printed it and my computer decided to waste all this pink ink, it printed really very pixelated and fuzzy. But anyway, this is just about the correct scale. There's something that is being lost in the curvature here. You can see that we wind up kind of in the seam allowance, whereas down here we are above, because remember we've got 1/2 inch seam allowance there, and then there's about a 1/4 inch gap. That's why I didn't cut this edge off, and then it should be this black line. This black line, by the way, is some sort of like really funky chain stitch. I'm not really sure how that's gonna do. I'm gonna have to look at stitches on my machine and see if I have anything similar, but that's not part of what I'm digitizing out. And then these are the French knots. These are done by hand, which you can tell they were like all over the place. I don't know why they were that uneven, but they really were. This part, however, is the machine embroidery, and I've kind of sliced it down here because I think it's going to be easiest if I can join the pattern where it is busiest, as in not in the middle of a spiral. That's going to be a lot harder to join. So I'm going to do a pattern edge right here, and then I'm also going to do a pattern edge in what will be the shoulder. You can actually see it's way up here, and I'm not sure really what it looks like so much to get from here to there, but there's kind of a starburst motif that happens right on the shoulder, and then it's more spirals below that. So I think we've got a couple more spirals up here. So I can either go into my embroidery software on my old computer, if it will let me, and use this as my base. Now that I blew this up in Canva, by the way, so that it would be to scale, and I can take my Canva image, which is like scaled with inches, and I can put that in the embroidery software, I think, and kind of layer like satin stitches here, satin stitches here, like fill on leaves here. That is challenging. However, there's one other thing that I can try. My machine was actually the top of the line machine when I got it back in, I think that was 2013 or 2014. No, I think it was 2013. And it came with a drawing pad. So basically you can lift up this little top bit. I can't do it with one hand, but you can lift it up like that and put some sort of paper underneath with a design, and then use the included little tablet pen and draw the design into the machine. It won't go there right now because it's not set up for embroidery, but it'll show up like on the screen. However, I do remember it being very clunky. I used it for my Rapunzel, which I will insert on the screen right here, but I have not used it for anything else because it is really quite clunky. And the other thing that I'm realizing now that I've pulled out this pad is that although my machine does a 12x8 hoop, this pad is either not to scale, which, you know, not helpful, or it only works for a 5x7 hoop because this is a much smaller surface. So I think I'm going to attempt to take the Canva file and put it into the PE design next on my old computer and see if I can draw all of these satin stitches and everything on top of that image, and hopefully that will work. Okay, so first victory, I was actually able to transfer all of the files. Sorry, this one's really flickery, but all of the files that go on the install disk that my old computer can read, this computer from 2010 can read, and I was able to put it all onto a USB and get it to install on my actual current computer. So yay, it is amazing how much faster this program runs on this computer than that computer, even though the program is from 2013, so it's like not that different from the other computer. Anyway, what I did right here was I think it's called My Design Center. Basically, you input an actual image into your software. So I started with the image that you see here from Canva, and I went through the 3 or 4 steps and basically deleted the other part of the image and had it stitch out all in black, but it can only select like, I want to do a satin stitch fill. So I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this honestly, but it's like doing a huge satin stitch fill all the way across these leaves. It just looks like a total mess. So I think what I need to do is I need to do a more manual punch method and kind of have this set up as a background here, and then go over and actually be like, okay, well, this is where I want like a curve of a satin stitch to go. This is where I want one individual satin stitch section, another individual satin stitch section. Because you can see like the little leaves when you have it blown up all the way, you can see the little segments in there, and that is what I want. So I think that's what I'm gonna have to do. Obviously it's gonna take a lot longer than the quick one, but I hope that this will actually work. Okay, so this is how we do a manual punch. I currently have selected an open curve and I'm set to a zigzag stitch. And I have found out that my zigzag stitch width and density should be 0.17 inches wide and the max density. That might be too much. We'll see, honestly. I should probably do just a little bit more of this and then like stop and test it out. But I have done several spirals already and we are going to start this next spiral probably right here where this other one leaves off. I'm tempted to have it overlap, but I don't want it to get really thick. So we'll just start it over a little bit and then you just start plotting points. So I'm trying to keep my points to the center here of this spiral. When you get to the end, you just double click and that creates the spiral. So there we go, we have another spiral. So I still have to figure out how to do the leaf sections. I think that's going to be with a shape fill, probably like one of these, like with the closed curve. We'll have to see if that will work. Let's see, fill stitch here, we'd want it to be satin stitch. Let's just test this out while we're going. I'm just again plotting points on the outside to get it to be this shape. I believe the original one had kind of separations in all of the leaves, which I will probably have to do in the larger sections, but in smaller ones like this, I'm kind of not as worried. And then I believe with this, we have to close up our shape. So we come back here to the beginning and double click. Oh, okay, that's really ugly. I see what's happening. It did the zigzag stitch on the outside and then a satin stitch on the inside. We definitely do not want that. We actually want a running stitch outline. So I'm just going to undo that and go back and do it again and fix that. Okay, we'll try one more time with the running stitch this time and the satin stitch. And I should pay attention to these, but to be honest, I don't entirely know what they mean yet. However, I think we do want our density probably a little bit more than what it was automatically set to. That should do it. Let's go ahead and try it again. You can also do all of this by drawing a smooth curve along the outline, same with for that initial spiral that we did, but sometimes plotting points almost feels a little bit easier. Okay, that is looking a lot better. I didn't change it to black, but all of this is going to be stitched on black. So I can click here and I can just change this to black. There we go, now it's black. Okay, I think that looks really good for a small section, but that's not going to work for the larger sections. For those, I'm going to have to do each little piece separately, but again, looks really good for the small one. So let's go ahead and we will just keep going. So I finished digitizing this section of the embroidery right here. It looks very clunky on this screen. Like you can see kind of how jagged the curves are. I haven't done any tweaking of like individual stitches yet. This is just me drawing it all out. And I am wanting to test it out because A, it looks clunky and kind of bulbous, and B, I just don't know how this is gonna look. Also, I already know that this one right here, I did this wrong. This was like on my obviously 3D picture of the collar, and this honestly needs to curve a lot bigger. I've actually, since I finished this, while I was hooping things up, I found another image, which I will pop on screen right here, that shows the shoulder. I was kind of making it up because there was just a little bit of a gap from what I had before, but now I can see the shoulder, and so I know where this comes in the design. So I am gonna have to tweak this. But as you can see, this is also a big stitch out. This is 47 minutes. That's a lot. I mean, it's all one color, which is great, but this is going to take a while. And so I honestly just want to start the stitch out, see what some of this looks like, what order it stitches in, kind of the general gist of just a little bit of it, and see if this worked at all or if this is going to be garbage. So let's go ahead and get started. And no, I don't have the fabric secured in the hoop at the moment. I am actually going to have it baste my fabric in for me. It's something that I really appreciate about this machine. Yes, I am stitching it on the wool. However, I am not stitching it in black because I don't want to waste all my black thread. So I'm stitching it in a brown because I have a bunch of brown colors and I don't think I will ever really use them up. Okay, so there we go. Now it's going to have my fabric nice and secure in there, but I am stitching it on the wool just to test what the density of these stitches looks like. So let's go ahead and start stitching out the pattern itself. I'll keep you with me for a little bit of this here, and then I'll kind of cut ahead to what it looks like at the end. Got a lot of the spirals done now. You can see how clunky some of them look as they go around the corners. So I'm not exactly sure the best way to even those out. And we're doing the first leaf section now. This was that test one that I had done where I did not delineate the internal bits of the leaf. And I'm not liking what it looks like for sure. So let's see how that compares to one where I did actually delineate those sections. Oh, I was curious about this tracing that it's going to do on each of the leaves though. But I've also now seen a closer up picture of the embroidery, and literally all of the trace parts is with like a funky looking little chain stitch. The same one that actually goes around the outside of the collar. So I'm not really sure how that's done or if I have a stitch like that. I'm sure I probably don't on my machine, but I'll have to double check in the digitizing. But this is one where I individualized each leaf. So each leaf is going to have its own little outline, each segment of the leaf, and it's going to come together to create one leaf. Okay, I definitely don't like how much of a gap there is between those two sections. So now I'm a bit worried it's going to wind up doing that on like literally every single section. I was hoping if anything there'd be a very slight overlap. Well, we have the gap here too. Okay, so those are all of the sections of that one leaf. I'm definitely not a fan of how that looks. They look very disconnected and disjointed. So I'm gonna let it stitch a few more leaves probably, and then I'm gonna take it out and examine and see what all needs to be changed, if I can even tweak what I did, or if I need to just learn how to digitize better in the first place and start from scratch. Gosh, look how wiggly that one is. That one's so bad. So some of the bits are definitely looking better than others. Ignore this little white part. That was just a tension issue that I didn't feel like we're correcting. But you can tell that this leaf section actually looks pretty darn good otherwise. And then it went over here and it started stitching this, and it is stitching the direction of the satin stitch across the length of that piece. So I don't understand why it's doing that whatsoever. But while this finishes up a little bit more, I am going to go work on sleeves. So let's go talk about sleeves. You will have to continue to bear with the background noise, but I am taking this sleeve from the Simplicity pattern, but this is actually the men's sleeve because I wanted the looser fit sleeve like she has in the movie. And of course, because I'm talking over here, Dora is coming up to show herself off. And I went and I measured around the sleeve, like around the part that goes into the arm's eye. I measured the length, etc. And the part that goes into the arm's eye may actually be slightly too large, and the length is actually, I think, perfect. Okay, Dora, we're not, this is not your show. Dora, at least say hi and show your face. Okay, great. Now get off my pattern. So I think I'm actually just going to make the size extra large as is, and we will see what that looks like as our mock-up. Well, darn, I don't know why it didn't dawn on me when I was looking at the patterns individually, but obviously I've cut out my mock-up pattern pieces and I just went to go lay them on top of each other, except that these pattern pieces, like on her coat, the seams should be even. These are not even. So I think what that means is that I have to kind of cut this a little smaller, make this piece a little bit bigger so they can basically form a new back seam. But I'm actually tempted to go ahead and put this together first, see if this even remotely works at all, and then just draw in my new seam line once this is all together, and the seam line will wind up being somewhere around here. Then I can just add the seam allowance back in, and then I'll have a two-piece sleeve that is even with both pieces. So yeah, I think that's what I'm gonna do. Let's go put this together. So the embroidery stitch out is done. I stopped it before it even went into that one because I knew it would be so wonky, but I actually let it do the rest of it. And honestly, I don't hate it. Obviously, there's a lot that needs to get fixed, but it's not the worst. I actually, again, I really like that part. I think that part looks so pretty. And most of these other parts, I think, look pretty darn good as well. I don't like that a lot of this one wound up stitching out with really long, weird stitches instead of going across like it should have. So I think I just have to change the stitch angle on that sort of stuff. Obviously, these need to be smoothed out, particularly like right here, this little angle right there, and like that. There's not too many of them, but it definitely needs to be smoothed out. This one, I don't know what happened there, this and this. There's just a lot of gap between those segments. So maybe I can widen the segments, move them closer together. I'm not sure what happened or how to make that better, but it needs to be better. And the ones that I did over here where there wasn't any definition, like this really small one, that one's fine. This one I think needed more definition. And also, honestly, this needed to stitch out before this did because it looks really funny where it's like hitting over that. However, this actually needs to be tweaked anyway because this right here, like by the time it gets to up here, it's not following the curve anymore. So I have this pinned to the collar right here, just kind of matching up where the center would be because this would be mirrored over here. And it's fine over here, like that's great. But then once we start to get kind of, I'd say probably about here, it is needing to be curved more up there because we're coming away from the top where it should be maybe a little closer. Honestly, it's not very far off. It's like 1/4 inch, I think, that it needs to be closer. Down here, I don't know if you can kind of see, but basically where this fold is, this is really the edge of the embroidery. We're way too close to the edge because this needs to have seam allowance and the little like edge border part. So really this needs to be like 1.5 inches from this edge, and we are I'm gonna say 3/4 inch, so we need to go way up. And this one I think is meant to come really close to the seam allowance, so actually this whole thing probably needs to shift up 3/4 inch. The problem is I'm really not sure how to do that. I think it's going to take a lot of tweaking of potentially like moving individual stitches, like literally every single little punch. And I'm a little afraid of that idea. It's going to be hard enough to smooth out little bits like this, but to fully shift whole spirals, that is like a whole other ballpark. And I'm just wondering, is it really worth figuring out the embroidery on my own? I mean, I think it is, because then I will have done it for the competition, for one thing, and for two, I can sell it to you guys if you want it, or sell it to anyone if you want it. But, oh, this is a lot of work. The sleeve mock-up is on right here. It is close. Like, I like the looseness overall of most of this sleeve. Normally speaking, I would say that's like way too loose, but this is what I'm going for with this one. However, this should be fitted up at the shoulder, and it is obviously not. It is very poofy, in fact, right here. So I need to take some of the sleeve head out, but I think beyond that, I think it's pretty close. I am wondering if I actually need to bring up the lower part right here, because I feel like when I move, it winds up pulling the whole jacket away because there's not really enough length to provide that movement. Like the armscye sits pretty low because it is a coat, it's kind of meant to, but even though the armscye is sitting low, like if I were to hold this right here and move my arm away, do you see how much length I lose in this? So I think that I need to extend the length here at the bottom of the armscye, which I think if I'm doing my like geometry right, I think that will also, just in doing that, create less length that has to get gathered up or eased up and into the arm's eye, but I do also need to take out some because that's not going to fix enough of it down there. The one other thing that I want to do is I like the length of it right now as is, like for a finished coat. So therefore I need to add seam allowance onto the bottom. So I'm going to add a 1/2 inch down to the bottom. So really I'm just going to work out how to take the gathering and turn it into just easing and raise that up just a little bit and add 1/2 inch to the bottom. So I think it is time for mock-up number 2. We are closer with the mock-up, but we are not quite there. And actually, I think that even though this coat is pretty oversized on her, I think that my shoulder seams are still just a little bit too far off my shoulder. Let me move that collar so you can see. I mean, it's sitting all the way off here. This is definitely way farther off than I would want on a regular coat or really any garment. But even for this coat, I think it needs to come up just a tiny bit so that it's just sitting a little bit more on my shoulder. And what that will do is it will also help this last bit of easing that still looks just a little too roughly gathered. It will help that to fit better because it's going into a wider space. This is actually the same mock-up as before, if you couldn't tell. I did not recut it. All I did, I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but all I did was I actually moved the gathering stitches down. So there's a huge like flap of fabric there. I just moved it farther down the arm's eye because I realized it was like poofing up in a little pinch point. I didn't need that fabric in there, so I just moved it down further that way. I also reset the bottom here just so that now I've got like about 1/4 inch or less seam allowance at one point. It's definitely better. I think it's probably sufficient to add like that 1/4 inch. I might make it 3/8 inch on the final and just add a little bit more room on the underarm part of the sleeve. And I don't know that it's really changed the length any. So I think the length I do still want to add that 1/2 inch just for seam allowance sake. But yeah, I'm going to move this a little bit further up the shoulder and just reset this top part of the sleeve, see if I can't get those gathers to go away, and hopefully that will be the answer. That is a lot better up here. Honestly, there's still some like too much easing, and also honestly I think I could move it even more up my shoulder, but that is significantly better than it was before. So I think I'm going to go ahead, cut off all the excess both on the shoulder pieces and on the sleeve piece, and go ahead and cut this out in both my regular fabric and also my liner fabric. I'm just going to use the same lining that I'm using for the body, which I talked about it last week, I think it was, but it's just a poly lining fabric from Joann's. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and cut that out, adding my 1/2 inch extra length here. And I am going to move the seam in the back like I talked about as well. So I can't even see where the seam is right now, but I do want it to be equal distance from where this one is because I like where this is and the other one should be, I'm pretty positive, I'm gonna double check the pictures first, but it should be equally far in that, and hopefully that will work out. I honestly don't know how straight it is, like that seam, but we are going to try that and we're going to cut it out directly in the wool and the actual fabric because I am almost out of sewing time this week and I'd really like to get just a little bit farther on this. So I've just looked at some of the pictures again, and maybe it's actually a happy accident that I followed this pattern, because if we look right here, I think that that seam placement is actually where I have this seam. So I'm gonna run with it. I'm gonna use the seams as is because that looks exactly right, and it looks like it's hitting just where the sort of dip in the cuff would be on my wrist. So yeah, actually, I think that'll work. I'll just cut off the excess and cut it out in my wool. So I'm a little torn right now because as you can see, I have the first sleeve set in, and when I first put it on, it was looking very, very far off my shoulder. Like the shoulder seam was just looking so wide. So I actually stuck a little pad in there. I do think it's looking better, but I don't know. Is it literally just that my shoulders are too narrow for this coat to look right? And maybe it is that I need padding. That could completely be the case. This is not a real shoulder pad, and I don't think I have any real shoulder pads, so I would need to go get a set, because I do think that with the pad in, it's looking a lot better. It doesn't look like it's falling off my shoulder, as in the seam is falling off my shoulder. This pad, you can see the bump too much. It's too much of a pad. But yeah, I don't know whether to like try and move it up, because of course this time I got such a nice clean set that I honestly don't know if there's room to move it up the shoulder, because I already kind of got rid of all of that excess ease in there. It just looks like really nice and clean, and it's a great set, honestly. So I'd love to not have to redo it. But I think I might need to buy a set of shoulder pads and see how this goes before I can like truly say, yes, this is the shoulder seam I want. So for now, I'm gonna go ahead and put in the other sleeve, just like this sleeve, and we'll see how it goes. All right, I have both sleeves on here, and as you can probably tell by looking at me, I do have the shoulder pad-ish type thing in this one. I do not have it in this one. So that's how you can see just how sloped my shoulders are, and also honestly, I have pretty narrow shoulders for my size, and I just don't know. I mean, I think that this is the shape that I'm going for, so therefore a shoulder pad would work, but would it be better to just bring up the shoulder? I don't know, honestly. I really don't. So I want to know your opinions. I know that this video is not coming out for like a little over a week from when I'm filming this, so it could very well be that I will have decided by then, because I will have done all of next week's sewing by then. So yeah, I may have had to decide. We'll see how the embroidery goes, I guess. So speaking of the embroidery, I haven't done anything else yet with it. It is still like you saw it before, and I need to do those tweaks. You guys seem to like it when I posted it on Instagram though, so maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was, and maybe by just kind of bringing this part, curving that up more and smoothing out my spirals, maybe that's all I really need to do. I mean, I do want to try and get that gap gone from those little bits, but like this part, it does look good. I mean, I probably still want to play with changing the stitch direction, because the thing about really, really long embroidery stitches is that they can snag really, really easily. And I mean, I don't want to like sit in a chair and wind up having this catch something and ruin all my embroidery. That would super, super suck. So yeah, I think I do want to play around with changing the stitch length, but all of that is going to be next week. I had really been hoping to get to those strips that go over the seams this week, but we're out of time. So that is actually going to be the thing that I'm going to be starting with next week, concurrently working on fixing the embroidery when I have like computer time, and also putting the strips on when I have sewing time. So I'll talk about that more next week. So that is going to be it for this week's video. If you like this week's video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week, with sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays and sometimes additional content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks or join my YouTube channel memberships right here on YouTube below the video. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Jean and Janelle. Thank you all so, so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!